Everyone, my name is Matt Jarbo. This is Three Buck Theater. And with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse opening today and my butt going to see it sometime this weekend, it's very interesting to see where things are currently at in regards with the deal between Sony and Marvel Studios as it gets ready to kind of come to a close, which, let's be fair, it's got about 6 months and some change until that becomes an absolute reality. All eyes are currently on Amy Pascal and Sony to determine whether or not this is going to be a reality, whether or not Spider-Man is going to stay in the MCU, or if Spider-Man is going to go to whatever Sony's Spider-Man cinematic universe is and do it over there. And the truth of the matter is this: fans want everything to be connected. So at this point, what we're really waiting for here are businessmen to come together to cut a deal. And thankfully, Amy Pascal actually seems to be on the side of the fans here, as I'm sure it's not at all business related, considering how much money Venom has made and Spider-Man Homecoming did, and in the MCU as a whole. It's clearly not profit motivated. But anyway, according to this here, Sony hopes to extend their Spider-Man deal with Marvel Studios, saying right now the future of the Spider-Man is up in the air. Despite being one of the most popular and lucrative superheroes and having been featured in 2 excellent films this year and set to feature in 2 enormous 2019 movies, we have no idea what's next for him. What complicates the matters is the deal inked between Sony and Marvel way back in the 1990s, where the then bankrupt company sold the Spider-Man movie to Sony, with the rules being that they kept them as long as they continue making films featuring the hero. After the success of the MCU and the relative failure of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, okay, I still don't know what about that was a failure. $709 million worldwide is generally not considered a failure, even for a movie that cost 200 plus million. I still, no one has ever been able to explain that to me outside of just the running narrative that it's a failure. I don't get it. But whatever. Just wanted to get that out of the way. So Sony agreed to a 5-film deal in which Spider-Man could come home to Marvel Studios, but that deal expires at the release of Far From Home. So it leaves a question of where things are now. With the success of Venom, some think the studio could bring Spider-Man back to the Sony universe of Marvel characters and pit him against Eddie Brock in Venom 2, and that's certainly a possibility, but this interview with Amy Pascal seems to suggest otherwise, saying, "I think about crying. I can only hope for a future where things work out. I've known Kevin since he was Avi's very, very quiet assistant, who for many years sat in the room listening to us and being so much smarter than any of us without any of us realizing. I will say that working with Marvel has been one of the highlights of my professional career." So obviously they want to keep it going. Obviously they want to make sure that this is a situation where they can, in fact, continue the profits rolling in. And it would only serve Sony's best interests to continue working with Marvel. It really, really, really would. Now, what you got to remember here is in 2014, so a little over 4 years ago, when the Sony hack happened and we learned about the potential conversations between bringing Spider-Man over to the MCU and how that was a surefire bet once it was announced. That was my call. I said, as soon as this word came out, it was going to happen because fans were going to demand it. And I'm a little right on it. I'm gonna take my lap, goddammit. But the point is, it's very lucrative for Sony to continue down this path. In 2016, they wrote down $980 million in losses from their film studio. That's nearly $1 billion, right? And Ghostbusters was a big part of that, but the only real saving grace in 2017 was 2016 was Jumanji. No, that was 2017. Sorry, Jumanji was like their real big saving grace. And Spider-Man Homecoming both did pretty well, and they want to, and then the 800 million for Venom that came out this year, so much so that they put Venom on home video 2 months after its release in theaters. So they want to capitalize on the Christmas craze, and they want to capitalize and get as much money as they can. It's a smart play, but everything they're doing is all profit minded. It's all profit motivated, so it makes sense to do that. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky because the way I see it is Kevin Feige is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He knows that Spider-Man is going to do really well regardless. He knows people love Tom Holland in the role, and he knows Far From Home is going to be a pretty big hit, especially after the events of Avengers Infinity War with the whole, like, Mr. Stark, I'm not feeling so good, that whole scene being improvised and that really tugging at everyone's heartstrings. Is going to be one of those things that really is going to solidify Tom Holland and Spider-Man as being a staple of the MCU. So he's going to want it. Now, this is where Amy Pascal is going to have to play smart. She's known Kevin since he was Avi Arad's assistant way back in the 90s, right? And he was the one who was sneaking Hugh Jackman copies of Wolverine on the set of X-Men because Bryan Singer didn't want it to be considered a comic book movie. And so Feige is the architect. I would argue Feige, where we are right now with comic book films over the last 20 years is Feige. Pascal is a businesswoman and she's very capable at staying alive. She's a survivor. When she was ousted as the head of Sony, she was able to formulate the deal with Marvel to move Spider-Man over to the MCU under her own production company tied to Sony. She's a survivor. She brought Sony its only win, pretty much, in 2018 with Venom. And she's going to be able to be the one to bridge the gap between the two. Now, ultimately, Kevin Feige wants Sony to fail. He does. It's a business decision, but it makes sense. They only have the rights provided they keep making the movies. If the movies all fail and they crash and they burn, that's going to be a situation where Marvel can come in and get the rights back, either for buying it out super cheap or waiting for it to expire, just like 20th Century Fox and the Daredevil license. But with Venom pulling in nearly $1 billion and Spider-Man Homecoming pulling in a fair amount of money and Far From Home coming out here pretty soon, the property value of Spider-Man is a lot higher, which means that plan is not going to happen. So it should be in Kevin Feige and Alan Horn and Bob Iger's best interest to basically give Pascal whatever the hell it is she wants. Because at this point, that's what it is. Pascal is a survivor and she's going to broker her survival one way or another. She's gotten lucky with Venom. She got lucky with Venom, lucky enough to save her ass for one more go through. So the question is, what does she want? What does she want? Ultimately, she wants to get her job back. That's my take on it. Ultimately, Pascal wants to get her position back. Where Tom Rothman's currently running Sony, hopefully into the ground because, screw that guy. You basically got her wanting to go back to either Sony or go to another studio, probably another studio to run because she doesn't want to deal with this. She already dealt with that once. She got screwed over once. She doesn't want to deal with that again, but to go someplace else. So she could make the attempt to try to, get a controlling stake in Marvel Studios because it's a multi-billion-dollar property and one that she's very good friends with the dude who runs it. Right now, she would have to contend with Bob Iger and Alan Horn as being her superiors. But if she has the power, she'd play ball. She kind of does have the power right now by being able to manipulate the Sony side of things of Spider-Man. So it's definitely not going to be a short-term gain for her. She's playing the long game. So yeah, we'll definitely be seeing Spider-Man stick around, but don't be surprised if there isn't some kind of kerfuffle that happens. If you don't hear about some of these discussions falling apart in the trades in order to get the fans on her side to keep Spider-Man in the MCU. Don't put it past her. I wouldn't. I really, really wouldn't. But anyway, I leave it to you. Do you think that we're going to see this deal continue or is it going to pass out? Do you feel like we're going to see this whole thing go the way that we wanted to, or is it going to go back to Sony and they're going to do their own thing because they see green with Venom and they want the money without having to share, which by the way, they already don't have to share because that's part of the deal. So I want to hear your thoughts. Write them below, or you guys can call into our voicemail line at 818-350-3281. That's 818-350-3281. My name is, of course, Matt Jarbo. This has been $3 Theater. Have yourself a great day, guys, and peace out.